Hari Om. If God or Bhagavan is the source of all ananda or happiness, how do we derive a lot of pleasure from the worldly objects? It is due to the age-old vasanas that we strongly believe that we do derive lot of happiness or pleasures from the worldly objects. It is basically because of the belief we have that worldly objects do give us a lot of pleasures. But it is not so. Let us see how. If something has to give us happiness, it should be a conscious being. If we take the case of God or Bhagavan, it is the very essence of consciousness itself. Existence, consciousness, bliss. It is the very awareness of existence. Whereas, consider any of the worldly objects, including human beings. Our physical body is not a conscious being. Though we have the presence of consciousness within us, but our physical body as such is not conscious being, and it is only because of that consciousness we are able to function in this world. Why? It's because unless there is consciousness, our mind cannot arise. The source of the mind itself is consciousness, conscious existence. So only because of the fact that I exist, I am so and so can happen. The body-mind identification can happen only when there is an I in the first place. There has to be someone to say I, isn't it? So that feeling of I-ness, which actually arises from I am, the source of the mind or the I-ness, the source of the individuality, source of the individual as such, the person. Unless that source of I am is there, how can there be mind which is active and which can associate itself with a physical body? It is not possible, right? So unless the mind is active, unless the mind has association with the physical body, we will not have that kind of I am the body idea, which is very much required for us to interact in the world with our feelings, emotions, and even to have a kind of belief that I derive happiness from the worldly objects. Even for this, we need to have a kind of ownership, experiencership, doership, physical body identification. All these are required. So all these can happen only when there is the conscious presence I am in the first place. So unless there is a conscious presence, there cannot be any meaningful lasting happiness. Then the question will be, then how do we derive such pleasures from worldly objects or people, etc.? The answer to that question would be we don't actually derive pleasures from the objects of the world which we assume. It is because of the fact that we have an age-old belief and strong notion that these worldly objects or people will give us lot of pleasures. Now, with that strong sense of belief, when a person experiences these worldly objects or people, what happens is that for a moment his mind, having fulfilled its desire to experience a particular worldly object, will sink within, will subside back into its source of the pure being, the pure or the presence of Bhagavan. And then, because of this subsidence of the ego, the mind will experience peace for some time until the next desire or thought arises. It is this peace that people wrongly interpret as the pleasure which they are deriving from the particular worldly object or person. This is a secret behind how we wrongly attribute the pleasure to be from a particular worldly object or a person, whereas in truth it is actually arising out of the fact that our ego is subsiding into its source of pure being, because of the fact that we have fulfilled our desire, and for a time being there is no next desire or thought rising up. And during the meanwhile, for this brief period of time, I will be happy. I will remain without any thoughts, which is actually the source of happiness. Remaining without thoughts is actually happiness. Remaining without thoughts yet being conscious is the source of happiness and awareness itself. So it is this wrong notion which is basically kind of misplaced identification of the source of happiness. Instead of attributing it to our own pure being, we wrongly attribute it to the particular worldly object or a person. So it is because of this wrong notion, our mind keeps on hankering after whatever the worldly objects or the people which we think will give us pleasures. And this goes on and on and on, unending, because each and every time we experience something with lot of desire, and then we kind of reflect back on those experiences as something which were very beautiful because they could give us pleasures. It actually creates more vasanas or makes a particular vasana more stronger within. And it is because of these vasanas, desires will keep on arise depending on particular situation, circumstances, etc. So that way we are in fact in a way forming more bondage by associating more and more with that particular worldly objects or people, and with the feeling that we are deriving lot of happiness and pleasures from these worldly objects. This is the error. The happiness arises because of the subsidence of the ego, and the ego subsides for a time being because we have fulfilled a desire, and until the next desire rises up, ego would subside. So actually the reason for happiness is subsidence of the ego, and for the subsidence of the ego one does not have to go after any worldly objects or persons, etc. One just have to engage in the practice of Mahayoga, which is basically to shift our attention towards source of thoughts or emotions, etc. When we thus shift our attention towards the source of any of the rising thoughts or desires, the source being the I am or the pure or the presence of Bhagavan itself, when our attention is strongly focused on that source of pure being or the presence of Bhagavan, then because we are not paying attention to those rising desires or thoughts, they would subside and go away. This is the way by which we need to eradicate all unwanted thoughts. This is the wonder of the practice of Mahayoga as taught by Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi. So thus each and every time we eradicate a particular desire or a thought, then at that very moment our ego would subside into its source of pure being, the I am, the presence of Bhagavan, and we will experience that kind of deep peace and happiness. This is the straight and most direct way to experience happiness by eradicating unwanted thoughts, sankalpas. So, this being the case, to foolishly believe that some worldly objects or persons will give us pleasures is illogical and meaningless. One who is wise enough would look into it deeply and understand the truth, thereby unnecessarily one need not waste the time in pursuing pleasures after these worldly objects, and instead directly remain in the source of our ego or mind, which is the pure being, the presence of Bhagavan, which is always there, ever, here and now. Only we just have to remain quiet and still to experience this joy. So, we should be very clear in the fact that no external objects can give us peace and happiness or pleasures, because the pleasure or happiness comes out of the fact that the ego is subsided. Subsidence of the ego is the source of peace and happiness, and the subsidence we wrongly attribute to experiencing or enjoying some worldly object, and only because of that I am getting this pleasure. No. The pleasure we are getting is because of the fulfillment of a particular desire which we think will give us happiness. And because we have fulfilled that particular desire in our mind, for a moment the ego would subside until the next desire arises. And for the time being, because of the ego has subsided into its source of pure being, the pure I, the presence of Bhagavan, we naturally feel that peace and happiness from that pure being, the I am, the presence of Bhagavan. So, the happiness or the pleasure we think we are enjoying is basically coming out from that presence of Bhagavan, the pure I, Atma, and not from any worldly objects. This we all should experientially understand, so that our mind would never even go after the worldly objects, because the more the ego subsides and more we experience, the mind experiences the joy in being in its source, the more easily one will be able to remain in the source, the subsidence of the mind and of the ego. So let us all merge our mind in the presence of Bhagavan all the time. Let us all remain in the presence of Bhagavan all the time by remembering the fact that we are already in the presence of Bhagavan only. It is only enough if we don't leave that presence by allowing our mind to wander away towards the worldly objects. This is the truth. So let us remain in the presence of Bhagavan all the time, and in itself is all happiness, auspiciousness and blessings and grace, the infinite grace of Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi. Arunachala Hritspurti Swarupanugrahatmane Namo Bhagavate Drashtre Ramanaya Nirantaram. Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala.